using a method to detect EDTA. Yes, of course. That was a letter with a number of citations on it. Before the testing was done, before they knew he was even going to appear as a defense witness, they reached out to Dr. Frederick Rieders. Why? Because Dr. Frederick Rieders, a PhD, a distinguished teacher, he runs a reference lab outside of Philadelphia, reference lab. People go to this laboratory when you want to develop toxicology techniques which are specialized and sophisticated because he is experienced, he is knowledgeable, he is learned. They asked him for work about EDTA. You know why else? As Dr. Rieders testified, he has expertise in EDTA, in its use to treat people for lead poisoning. He's been working with EDTA for, I think, something on the order of 30 years. He's the expert you would call to interpret the data. So they asked him for references. And now they want to tell you that he's out of his mind, that he is not reasonable in his interpretation of this data and he shouldn't be trusted. Very interesting, isn't it? Now, you know, when you evaluate the testimony of Agent Martz and Dr. Rieders, there really isn't that much disagreement. And remember the circumstantial evidence charge about whether there's two plausible, reasonable interpretations. You have to take the one that goes with innocence. There are three questions. Is there EDTA there? Dr. Rieders says yes. Agent Martz says could be consistent with EDTA based on the MSMS readings. If it isn't EDTA, says Martz, I don't know what else it could be. Next question. If it's EDTA, how much is there? Now, both of them agree that it is in parts per million, not parts per billion. And both agree, when you examine the testimony, that if it is in parts per million, it cannot come from the EDTA we ingest in food that then is secreted into the blood. You don't have parts per million that way, because if you did, you'd be in serious, you'd have serious health problems. You wouldn't clot. You'd bleed to death, as Dr. Rieders was pointing out. The next question, and this is where they parted company, is the amount of EDTA here sufficient to have come from a purple top tube? Agent Martz says, Dr. Rieders says, unless you were treating somebody for lead poisoning, injecting EDTA into them, that is the only reasonable explanation for parts per million in these samples of EDTA. Agent Martz says, no, I can't really say, because I would expect there to be more EDTA in a sample left for 3 weeks on the back gate or on a sock, that I'm seeing 6 months later. But he never did a single experiment to find out how much you would expect to get from stains that are months old and have subjected to environmental insults. And you saw that there were quantitation problems when they tested it. It would go up and down. So when you look at it, look at the credentials, Martz versus Rieders. Rieders has far more experience with EDTA. They wanted to hire him, or they consulted with him, I should say. Dr. Rieders works with the FBI. They go to him and consult, as you heard, on cases. He was working on a case for them, with them at the time he came here to testify. He runs a reference lab that's specialized in these issues. Even though he does not have the $750,000 machine yet, the MSMS that Martz is using, he understands it, seen it before, interpreted data from it. He's getting one soon. So it's not a question of the machine, it's a question of the expertise to understand the data. Agent Martz, he has a bachelor's degree. He had some trouble with pi. I don't want to belittle that, but he didn't even, there's some disturbing parts of his testimony, let's face it. He didn't even consider the validation studies that had been performed by others at the FBI laboratory. they're going to make a big deal about these, he didn't look for that 132 daughter ion. I promise not to talk about daughter ions to some people, but he didn't perform the test to find that. All the digital data he threw away. He comes up with this thing where he says he tests his own blood and he finds some level of EDTA in it, but he threw away the documents about what he did. He put it in a test tube for 2 weeks that has silicon in it, has a red stopper in it that could be a source of EDTA. He doesn't go and test anybody else's blood. I mean, this would certainly be a phenomenon if we found parts per million in all these kinds of blood, or his whole method is screwed up. Why didn't he test more? They're going to come back and say, well, Dr. Reeder should have done more of a test on these leftover samples. Excuse me. That's what they should have done. Well, it's their burden. It's their burden, after all. They say it's key evidence. She said it's their defense. Well, then why not get some real studies or do more studies or save the data or present something to this jury that's credible to disprove it? Ms. Clark gets up here and says, we have disproven that this could be EDA from a purple top tube. Dr. Reeders has no basis whatsoever for saying this. It can't be a reasonable interpretation of the evidence. Well, saying it doesn't make it so. It's their burden. They have to disprove this beyond a reasonable doubt. They have not. An essential fact, that circumstantial evidence charge says. An essential fact must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Ms. Clark got up here and told you this was essential. Have they done that? No, they haven't. That is many, many reasonable doubts. Now I'd like to talk about missing blood. And I think that we can talk about this in the following way. Access, opportunity, and the smoking gun, Nurse Thanoparatus. Could we have the first picture? Now, Detective Van Adder, the man who carried the blood, picked up blood from the coroner's office of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, blood tubes that contained EDTA. Let's show them all. Remember these? These are pictures of both sides of the tubes. Just pull them out. I think the point is made. One after another. Covered with blood. He got those from the lab. He carried those. Those tubes, the testimony is, have EDTA in them. He carried them on June 15th. Now, we do not have records. There are no records of the amounts that were initially put in those tubes or where he went, how long he went. No real evidence that we can examine about that, but he carried it. On the other hand, when we turn now to Mr. Simpson, that's enough. Yeah, he testified. He took him from the coroner's office and he brought him to LAPD. But there is no record of how much was initially put in those tubes, so we can't retrace the amounts. Now let's look at the handling of the defendant's, Mr. O.J. Simpson's reference file. Detective Van Adder, as Mr. Cochran pointed out, was so upset about how this goes that when he was asked, well, when did you get the blood vial, he said 3:30. Well, it was 2:30, we know that. His testimony is he gets the vial of blood and he goes off and he has a cup of coffee and he's walking around Parker Center with a blood vial in an unsealed tube. And as you know, the rules are you're supposed to book it immediately. You can book it in that building, Parker Center. You can walk a mile, go a mile away, it takes just a few minutes, and you book them at Piper Tech, where the SID lab is. And you buy a DR number, which is the number for the case, and the case starts. That's what the rules say. But that's not what they were doing. Now, can we have the next? That's not it. I want the instructions. There are instructions on this envelope that we reviewed, I think, with Mr. Yamauchi, which are fascinating. It says that the investigating officer requesting withdrawal of blood shall, when the vial is returned to you, enter your initials, shake the tube vigorously. When the affidavit is completed, sign below as a witnessing officer and seal the vial in the completed sealed evidence labels. In other words, what you're supposed to do after you get the vial from the nurse is you put it in this envelope, and the instructions say, using completed sealed evidence labels, you seal the envelope. Now, he's been a detective a long time. He knows the rules. And the testimony is he's never done this before, not seal it, not walk around with the blood. And now there's something else, and it's a little hard to see on this photograph. And we tried to get the original here, but at the very, very bottom, there's something really weird that you can inspect. It's covered over by the label. You see the date? I declare this is not apparatus. I declare independently of perjury the foregoing is true. And then it says 5/10/94. May 10th, 94. Well, wait a second. This was June 13th. This envelope is an old envelope in the lab. It's something that Mr. Paradas had hanging around there for some reason. It says May 10th, 94. It's an old envelope in the lab. Why is that? What's going on here? They're not following the rules. He's grabbing this envelope. He's carrying around this blood. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit. It's a serious problem, isn't it? Now, the next thing that we have is this misnumbering, you recall, of the blood vial. And Mr. Fung, as you remember, was stumbling over it. There's a problem here. The sneakers were brought in by Detective Lang the next morning, and they were put in as 17. The blood vial is numbered as 18, indicating receipt the next morning after the sneakers, and 19 is this hair that Mr. Fung took off the Rockingham glove, all that morning of June 14th. And you recall the testimony that we had in this case, that Mr. Fung remembers he had such, problems. He said, well, and I walked out of Rockingham. I had the tube either in my Ponzi box, that metal box, or I had it in my hand in the envelope, or I had it in a brown paper bag and I put it into the truck. And then we showed him videotape, and all of a sudden it changed, and we had videotape of people inside and Van Anna bringing in the envelope. And now the state of the evidence is that Andrea Mazzola was given a black trash bag, and that she didn't know, nobody told her, that the envelope had been put in it, and maybe some of those other evidence cards. And you saw the video where they walk into the truck and they throw that trash bag inside the truck and they go back to the lab. And now the testimony is that they leave it out on a table in a trash bag after they, put the swatches in the test tubes, and they leave. Now, and they don't even refrigerate the vial. Now, this is a very odd story, to say the least. And I think what's really peculiar about it, when you get down to it, is the way the testimony came out. Andrea Mazzola said something very interesting. She said that when she saw the next morning, June 14th, the blood vial in the black trash bag, she realized for the first time that she had been the one that carried the blood vial out of the Rockingham residence. So she's saying that she knew that on June 14th. You with me? Now, we had all this, we spent 3 days on this, if you recall. Mr. Fung couldn't remember how the blood vial was carried out. These prosecutors knew that there was misnumbering, that there was a problem with this blood vial and its transfer. They knew it was a problem. Now, if Miss Mazzola had known since June 14th that she had carried this out in a plastic bag, because she realized it looking at that at the next moment, how come nobody was told this? Why didn't somebody know this? Why didn't they interview these witnesses before they got on the stand for 8, 10 days apiece? And this was obviously a crucial problem, because there's something wrong here. And of course, when she ultimately testified, poor Miss Mazzola had to go over and sit on the couch and close her eyes for 20 minutes because she was tired and didn't see what went on in the foyer. Now look, I'd submit to you I don't think that's all credible evidence. I think there's something really wrong here, but you know, you don't even need it, really, if you think about it. Because in terms of access and opportunity, all that really matters is what nobody can deny. And that is Detective Van Adder is walking around with a May 10th envelope that he should have sealed and he should have booked for 3 hours at least, unaccounted for. What is going on? There's something wrong. It's not coincidence. There's something wrong, terribly wrong. Now, the last part, really, of the missing blood issue is thanoparatus. The issue arose about how much blood was in the blood vial. Now, if you recall from the testimony, the first thing that happened is that Mr. Yamauchi got the blood and he stuck in a pipetter that takes 1 ml, and he created the Fitzco card. So that's 1 ml. The next thing that happens, that's on June 14th. On June 21st, toxicology gets it. And toxicology does things in an appropriate way. They measured how much blood was in the tube. They take a tube, as Mr. Matheson described it, you fill it with water, you look at the other tube, and you make a measurement. And they measured it to be 5.5. Now, if it's 5.5, and we started with 8 cc's, and Yamauchi took 1, there's 1.5 missing. No way out of that. No way out of that. Now, Mr. Matheson came in, and you saw these incredible experiments that he was performing, where he went and he started taking, he looked at all the other times people went into the tubes, and he's saying, well, you know, if you pipette it out and you pipette it out, you may lose something over time. But let's face it, the Matheson explanations can't get around the 1.5 missing right away. There's 1.5 missing right away, and toxicology proves it, and they knew it. So the only other way to explain the missing blood is thanoparatus must have been mistaken. That's the only way. And what I'll leave you with this morning are 2 clips from thanoparatus. Technology willing.
blood did you withdraw from Mr. Simpson?
Approximately 8 cc's.
When you say approximately, you did not measure the amount?
Well, it could have been 7.9 or it could have been 8.1. I just looked at the syringe and looked at about 8 cc's. I withdrew the needle from his arm.
And did you go through the same demonstration that you just showed for the camera today when I was at the dispensary? That's all right. Now, there was another statement that I wanted to ask you about that also took place at the preliminary hearing. Let me just get hold of that. And that was the statement that said, I just looked at the syringe and it looked at about 8 cc's.
That was
You remember that?
statement. Which I looked at it, I should have said it looked like it was enough, which it was enough. The 8 cc's, I was wrong in that 8 cc's altogether.
Can you show us what you did do in terms of looking at the syringe after the blood, or when the blood was being drawn from Mr. Simpson?
Syringe here. Okay. I pulled it out. I saw that. What it was, I squirted the blood into it and trash. I just looked at the syringe.
Okay,
I didn't turn it over.
there is a part.
Come back from lunch, we'll discuss the meaning of this. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our break for the lunch recess. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss this case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Don't conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. Don't allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. We'll stand in recess until 1:30. All right, thank you, counsel.